Hey folks, as many of you know, we had the Diablo 3 Q&A playthrough stream this morning where I played Diablo 3 and answered questions about my experience being a designer on the game. I know that watching the entire stream can take a long time, so I've done a quick edit pass here where you can just cut to different chapters and see the questions and the answers from the stream itself. We go over things like crafting, like a skill rune system, which didn't get shipped. We talk a lot about legendaries. There's some just general sort of interesting design discussion as well, which I really enjoyed. I hope you find this valuable. If you'd like to do something like this again, let me know. For now though, enjoy the stream. What do you think of the trend of crafting becoming a focus of ARPGs? I always felt like it replaced the dynamism of random chance with the monotony of targeted grinding. I think that crafting is the effective backup. In a game where everything is incredibly random, and that's fundamental to the game, crafting allows some sense of agency. It also provides regular cadence of rewards for players. Whenever someone sits down and plays a game, they want to be rewarded for it. Their time investment, they want their time investment to actually have meaning. If they don't, if they walk away without feeling like they got something sort of tangible for it, I think that leaves them with, I guess, kind of a bad taste in their mouth with regards to the game. And this isn't just an ARPG thing. This is a bunch of different things. If you sit down and you play a game of Mario Party with your family, and then it was a terrible experience, you know, if you all argued the entire time, you're going to walk away and that's not actually rewarding to you. In an ARPG, the core reward is going to be loot. That's what you're looking for. Is you're looking for some amount of progression over time. So what crafting tends to do is it tends to supplement that and provide you with a backup reward along the cadence there. Something where it feels like no matter how much time you invested into the game, you are getting something tangible out of it that you felt like was what you wanted as opposed to just the random element of it all. Crafting shouldn't replace looting. And in an ARPG where nothing is really targeted, very little in an action role-playing game has a targeted element to it. I mean, Kadala was a good example of crafting for the expansion for us. That's why very little effort actually went into actually doing any real work on the blacksmith or the mystic or anything, because at the end of the day, that's what Kadala was for. She was functionally, okay, I have played the game for a certain number of hours or certain number of minutes or one session, and then when I finish, I come out of it and I didn't get an item that I was hoping to get, right? So at that moment, I feel like I want something. And if I don't get anything out of it, it's gonna feel really, really terrible. So crafting then gives me a chance to make up for that. A lot of crafting in an ARPG as well is not just about making a new item, it's about customizing an item to fit your build. ARPGs are all about creating builds, and the more opportunity there is to explore and discover new builds that are fun or different or interesting, the longer legs your game has. When you're not in the target audience as a designer, like I'm assuming you mean as a designer who's working on the game, when you're not in the target audience, how do you avoid bias while building game mechanics? I often struggle with what I find fun versus what the audience actually enjoys. I think like one of the misconceptions of designers or non-professional designers, and I don't mean that in a disparaging way, I mean that more in like designers who are younger or who are making mods or who are aspiring to become game designers. They have this belief that, or a misconception that they're going to be working on games that they love the entire time that they're making games. Like say, if they love playing Call of Duty, well then they're going to get to work on Call of Duty. But then they get into the industry and all of a sudden they're making an RTS game and they hate RTS games. Or they're making card battlers. Now, ideally, you get to work on a game that you do love. But the reality is you do this for a living as well, and you end up having to make natural sacrifices because it's a job. You know, like it's a fun job. It's super exciting. It's something which can drive a lot of passion. But at the end of the day, it's a job. So you have to do things that you might not ordinarily find fun. How to accomplish that? For me, and I can only speak from my perspective, I find it enjoying to discover it's the psychology of it for me. It's not just about building something that I would play. It's about the understanding of the player. So for example, in an ARPG, complete, candid, authentic confession, I probably didn't play Diablo enough in order to work on Diablo. There are other people out there that played Diablo way more than I ever did and understood the game way better than I did before I got the job working on Diablo. And so I made some mistakes with regards to thinking the game was much more about challenge. Things should be harder than what they really are, and then tuning it in such a way when realistically the game is about efficiency. The game is about how fast can you kill something in order to get the loot. So how did I, in that situation, understanding that, growing to understand the audience, talking to the audience to really find out what drives them, and then trying to find interesting ways to solve those problems for them. So understanding their psychology, one, I find that very compelling as a designer. What is it that motivates them? I think most games are all based around intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Or, extrinsic motivation is a good example of loot, right? Getting better loot is a clear extrinsic motivator. Eventually, the intrinsic motivation becomes, this is just naturally fun. So understanding the audience by talking to them, by playing the games that they play, by exposing myself to all the things that audience enjoys, and then trying to solve the problem for them. Most of the time, games, especially the ones that we make now where the game environment is so broad and so big and there's so many games out there to play, we end up in situations where it's not necessarily about making something new. It's about taking something and improving on it for solving problems for the audience. So what is the core problem that they're having? And then how do you solve for it? What would that solution be? And oftentimes that isn't what they're asking for. There's this famous quote from Henry Ford, the guy that came up with the car. He says, if I had have asked them what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. When actually what they wanted was a car. So finding the car, finding the solution to the problem, which isn't necessarily what the audience is directly asking for, but more finding trying to experiment and come up with something interesting in the game space that will still appeal to them, but won't, be far or dramatically different or far away from what it is that they want. That's my perspective on it. Instead of oh yeah, now suddenly I'm playing a game which I love to play. Souls-like is a great example. For me, I don't actually enjoy Souls-like very much. I played the crap out of Elden Ring. I played Sekiro as much as I possibly can. Most of the time, though, I try and cheese it. I'll try and find something which just lets me level up. But I find it very interesting to play those games so that I can understand the audience, so that I can understand what is it about this type of game that these people find so interesting. And if I was to try and solve that for them, or if I was to try and improve on some of those problems for them, what would the car look like as opposed to just a faster horse? How we approach the design of classes and their item sets. I think they're really well done to make the player progression feel fun, So curious about how the process went. To begin with, we sucked at it. We did not have legendaries were the last thing that we really did. The designer who worked on it was constantly sort of yelling and screaming, not literally, but saying, hey, we need to put more effort into these things. And we didn't. We basically made all items and item sets things that were just slightly better stats. This is a big reason why when we first released, we didn't really have good motivation for people to play. Everyone was just searching for 6 affix items when they should have been looking for legendaries and set items. Then as we were live and as we started to realize, hey, these are the things that players really should be chasing and really should be like going for, then we started to do a pass on them. I took a stab at doing the first pass, and most of the design process was around looking at abilities that the different classes had and asking the question of how would we break this? What would be an interesting way to break this? So some of it was about just giving you extra, like doubling down on runes. The whole philosophy around the legendaries, especially the first pass, was basically this should feel game breaking. This is after we'd started to realize that the game was about efficiency over challenge, that it was okay to allow players to break the game, as opposed to trying to like make it really, really hard to kill Diablo. Like that really wasn't the point of the game. The point of the game was gaining power and then gaining more ability, not more ability, sorry, gaining more power and gaining gear through that. But yeah, like the whole philosophy around them was how do we allow the player to break the game? This was really unlocked once we had seasons, because then seasons could be something where it was very much, hey, you can break the game. It's just for a season. It doesn't matter if a whole bunch of people manage to get the ridiculous blessed hammer build, which just puts blessed hammers everywhere on the screen, and they're like completely wiping everything out, because then the season's going to reset. And then in the next season, we can put in a new set that deliberately breaks something different, and it is just another chase item for you to go for. But yeah, fundamentally, they were about breaking builds, breaking the game, and trying to give players something new to chase. Then there were a bunch of ones that were just cosmetic. There was like ones that were, it was a dagger that bled. Because obviously, they weren't the best, but we needed ideas, and ideas are actually really hard to come up with. How does the pressure from making money affect game decision from game developers these days? The best answer I can give there is the talk, the speech that Sven gave at the Game Awards. I have it as a short on my YouTube channel. At Blizzard, for the longest time, designers were not focused on what would make money. Designers were focused on what would be fun. If you make a game that is fun, you will make money. Fun has all these different kinds of connotations to it. It's not, there's engaging, there's, you know, fun is like an extraordinarily loaded term. People get mad at me when I say this, but at the end of the day, if no one wants to play your game, you're not going to make any money from it. It's simple. If your movie is terrible, no one's going to go see it. So you're not going to make any money from it. If your book is poorly written and doesn't have an engaging story or character, no one's going to read it. So you're not going to make any money from it. So if your game isn't fundamentally something that is fun, and that is an incredibly broad term, and I fully accept that, but if your game isn't fundamentally fun, and if you start your design around how are we going to make money from people, I think you're in trouble. I don't think that you're going to end up making a lot of money. Now, there's probably like good examples of where I'm wrong there in the industry, of where that was done. But I think it's becoming much harder to do, because I think that the audiences in general are becoming much more savvy about what fun actually is and being exploited for money. How do you decide what feels fun in a particular genre? like with Diablo. Understand what the audience wants. Understand what it is that they're looking for, and then provide that. I know it sounds really simple, but it is. Fun is about what the audience is looking for. I talked about how to make a game that you don't find fun. And this is something that I think a lot of people assume when I say make a game that's fun. I don't mean make a game that's fun for you. I mean make a game that's fun for your audience. Do you ask players? How do you figure out what the audience is looking for, especially if you're an indie dev who doesn't have as many resources for market research? Play the living crap out of the games. And yeah, ask the player. Reddit is a great source for this. If you're an indie dev, ideally, you're making a game that you find fun. Because ideally, you shouldn't have as much pressure from, say, a publisher to make a game for a very specific audience. I think if you're an indie dev, and I know the struggle is real for like funding and everything like that, but ideally if you're an indie dev, a big part of the reason why people do indie is because they are tired of working on the next Assassin's Creed for Ubisoft and they want to branch out on their own. You know, look at Nate Hercupile. He was tired of working on other people's games, so he wanted to branch out and do his own. So, play the crap out of the games, learn as much as you possibly can about them, and then that will unlock the ability for you to understand what it is the audience wants and then build something around that. Diablo 3 party play is one of the best amongst the popular ARPGs. How important was the multiplayer side of the game when the classes were being designed? It was always top of mind. We knew that we always wanted it. So philosophically, when we talked about multiplayer, because there is this trade-off of solo versus multiplayer, and regardless of all the drama around, hey, you have to play online and all that sort of thing that happened, the philosophy was always, we wanted to reward you for playing with friends, but we didn't want to punish you if you played alone. It basically then turns into the soft benefits that you get by playing with friends. There are no abilities that are exclusively beneficial to other, like there's nothing in the game which is like, okay, this is only something that buffs other people, or this is only a heal which heals other players. It always had to have something that benefited the player themselves so that it would be helpful in solo play. The laws are a really good example of this. The laws all work in such a way that when it's on my bar, I get a passive buff. I'm just better because I have it. But if I'm with my friends and I'm nearby and I'm playing together, then I can push that button and I make them all better as well. There's also the passive bonuses that you get. I think that they're still in the game, but there's the passive bonuses that you get for whenever you're near someone, you gain extra experience for playing together. But it's not something that if you were playing on your own, you wouldn't necessarily feel like, you were being punished for that. It'd be really interesting to hear where the gameplay features, especially ability system and itemization, was designed to facilitate an ever-evolving metagame. Which parts were inside the original intention, and what was found later? What was something that fell short, and what was something that had more legs than you could have expected? As example is seeing an item that added projectiles to my magic missile was a revelation as a player, a clear inspiration for trying a new build, one framed around an attack I'd always avoided until that point. Yeah, I mean, Brian's example there is literally it. And I sort of talked about this a little bit already. The intention behind the legendaries were that they should be so special that they feel like they're breaking the game for you. He pointed out something which I hadn't mentioned yet as well, is they probably want you to move to a different spell. One of the challenges that we had before we had seasons was that people would be watching a streamer and that streamer would say, this is the best build for your barbarian. And that's that. Suddenly the entire community was using that build. But then there's all these other abilities out there that are going unused. And even though they may not be, in quotes, the best, they still might be pretty fun. And I mean, part of this comes back to how we tuned the game. We tuned the game, I don't know if you guys remember, but when the game first came out, wasps in Act 2 in Inferno were just a complete nightmare, right? So we tuned the game to be too hard. That then resulted in players trying to find the best build that they could then focus on. So some of these legendaries were like, okay, go try out this other skill that you might not have thought about using before. What do you recommend doing to create attachment ownership through the systems in the game? To be clear, to create an investment in, as well as relationship between the player and the game. Like to make the player care about the game? Do you mean like the character or the game itself, or both? Is it depends an okay answer? I think the biggest thing that you can do is try and create systems that encourage the player to spend time with the game and don't make them feel like they made a that make them want to come back tomorrow intrinsically as opposed to extrinsically. My wife has played Heyday every single day since it released. She hasn't spent a single dollar on it, but she won't skip it. She plays it because it is comfort food for her. Whereas for Diablo, the systems are designed in such a way that it's the just one more run feeling. It's the promise of it. It's the potential behind trying to find an item, trying to find that one more upgrade, which I think is the core motivator for people to play a game like this and to start becoming attached to it. I'm going to use WoW again for like another example, but a lot of the early dungeon and social design was built around, and I'm theory crafting here. I don't know that this is real. This is just my sort of suspicion. I don't know whether this is intentional or not, or whether this just comes from, say, EverQuest. But a lot of the itemization design in dungeons is built around social pressure. So for example, if I'm playing a dungeon with someone, a group of friends, and someone gets a good item, I feel social pressure to come back and play it with them again. Cozy games are it's just a nice, safe place. So you feel like you're in a place where it's just safe. Whereas a game like Last of Us, I can't play it. I have kids and it just kind of ruins me every time I play it, but or try to play it. But that is about experiencing the story and building that personalized relationship with the characters themselves. Somewhat related, there was a good GDC talk by a Riot designer on cursed or unsolvable problems. One of them is something D3 community-wide theory crafting. Have you come across, thought about solving for this? Asked because heavy randomization of drop skill runes would greatly hinder lopsided meta games in season-based ARPGs like D3. We always said players are why we can't have nice things, which sounds kind of terrible when I say it out loud, but it is kind of the reality of live service games today, where the community will see something and then trend towards it that's based entirely on theory crafting. I think the best thing that we can do is kind of accept that it's not going to be something which can be pre-solved. It's going to be something which can be responded to. And so long as your systems are built in such a way that they can be heavily tuned and easily tuned, or that you can add content to in order to mitigate for it, I actually think that it's something you can kind of just integrate into the design for it. Seasons is the best example of this. It's okay to create something that lets the player break the game. It's okay, right? Like, especially in like an ARPG game like this, or in live service games. Hell, look, if in Marvel Rivals for the next week, Iron Man's ability was the best thing ever, and the entire community like trended over to using Iron Man, okay, they're going to feel great. Like, it's going to be okay for them to do that. What's the problem with the player having fun? There was a time when, I can't remember what it is we were working on, but I think I was working on the Legendaries. Right, the Legendaries, and we were talking about balance and how if we had the philosophy that the legendary items should be the thing that basically just breaks the entire game, what's the point of that? Like, isn't that bad? No. Why would that be bad? The fallen grunt isn't going to care when he dies. He's not going to care that some crusader came along and like beat the living smack out of him, because it's an NPC, it's a character in the game. His job is to die and maybe drop loot for you. So it should be fun for the player. There should be an amount of that. And if your players are theory crafting and enjoying theory crafting and enjoying moving between different builds, that's okay. The problem really is around the game becoming stale. Now, if the game becomes stale because there is one meta and that meta can't, like, your game can't adapt or can't be tuned in such a way that you can shift players away from that meta, then yes, that is the fundamental problem at that point. But I don't think it's a cursed problem if you intentionally integrate the solution or understand that as a live service game, you're going to have to be able to respond to players' theory crafting and what they believe the meta to be. Design systems that ensure that, you know, players can do that, that the designers can respond to that. Oh, Bling, you asked this the other day. So a couple that we tried out. Probably the one that I remember the most is one where, so for example, if we take a look at the skill tree, I'll eventually have access to all of my skills rune, and they're just part of the kit. They're just things that I unlock. They're not something which, like, they're just embedded. So one of the ways that we tried it was that you had to actually find the runes as you were playing. So, for example, as you were killing monsters, in the same way that you would find a Crusader shield or a flail, you would find the runes for the abilities that you had on your character. You might also find runes that were for other classes as well. Not only that, but you also, each rune had different, I guess you could call it rarity. We didn't have them as rarity. We had them as like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5. I think there was 3 different tiers to each rune. And then on top of that, so you had to, not only did you have to find the rune that was for the skill that you wanted, that you liked. So for example, you know, say I wanted to find a rune to upgrade punish or slash. I'd have to find that rune from a creature somewhere in the same way that I would have to find a shield. And then I would equip that. And then I would also have to find a higher rarity version of that rune as well in order to make it better. The core stats of that were basically just more damage, if I remember correctly. On top of that, there was affixes on runes. I don't know if that was in the first iteration of this or if this was something that was added later, but there were actual affixes on the runes. So for example, I'm going to assume that you guys know what I mean by affixes, but affixes are, you know, toughness recovery, more specifically here, like +3 life after each kill. Like that's an affix or a suffix, prefix or a suffix. That meant that the overall skill game had just way more depth to it. You would actually run around and try and find new skills, new skill runes. And then there was the ability for you to really try and min-max the skills of your character beyond just the equipment that you were wearing, the paper doll that you were wearing. I actually argued hard against the idea of it. And I wish I hadn't. In retrospect, I think it was a mistake not to do something along those lines. I'm not going to say that the skill system that we ended up with is bad. I think it's perfectly fine for Diablo. But as many of people have pointed out, there is an amount of simplicity to the game, which doesn't really lend itself to the ARPG, the desire of the action role-playing game audience.